Hello everybody. Um, uh, Before we start, quiero saber, ¿hay alguien que necesita interpretación en la llamada? Sí, sí, porque tenemos interpretación. If not, all right. Well, let's get started. So, my name is Karim Sanchez. For those of you who haven't met yet, I am the new lead organizer at the North Bay Organizing Project and am very excited to be part of the team and representing North Bay Organizing Project. So welcome to another session in the School of Change. Before we get going with the agenda, just want to make a few housekeeping announcements. We ask participants to be on mute when you're not speaking. And also, if you do want to add something to the conversation or you have a question, we're asking folks to include that in the chat. There will also be a portion in the agenda for open discussion. And also, if you could, and thank you, Chad, for introducing yourself in the chat. If folks could introduce themselves in the chat so we know who's all here, that would be good too. To just kind of give a brief overview of what this hour will look like on the call, we will have a brief kids activity description from Amber, and then we will hear from our guest speaker today, Devin Cardenas from Rights to the City. And then we'll have an open discussion, and then we'll finish up after that open discussion. All right, so right now I'll hand it over to Amber.
Thanks, Kareem. So we don't have any kids on the screen today, but I actually do have an activity to share. And I'm gonna share a link with you, and then I'm gonna share, I'm just gonna paste it in the chat box. I'm not gonna take too much time today. But there was this lovely article written by a woman who works at Movement Generation. It's called Parenting During Coronavirus, Opportunities to Reconnect and Decolonize. And it's by Angela Aguilar. And she has a lot of really wonderful and deep ideas, but this one in particular relates to home. And so I thought it would be a nice one to do if you have any kids that you're ever going for walks with, or if you're out in your neighborhood. And it's called block mapping. And let me just paste it right into the chat here to everyone. And I'll read it out loud so that people watching the video can have a sense of what it is. You take a journey through your neighborhood and ask your kids to note the built environment and the natural environment. What is going on in your neighborhood? What do the houses look like? Are there lawns? What do lawns require to stay green? And this goes on and on to make a lot of observations as you're walking around your neighborhood. And then when you get home from your walk, you help your kids draw a map, and you get them to talk about the walk. Maybe you take a video of them. And you can use this each time that you go out on a walk with the kids, and ask them to notice different things or pay attention to different things. So that description is in the chat box, and then I'm going to add a link to the article. So if you want to partake and we come back together next time, maybe we can have a little time to reflect on that. And with that, I'll pass it back to Karim.
Thank you, Amber. So the purpose of these calls or these sessions, the School of Change, is because the intention is to create space to continue to develop a sense of comfort in articulating the framework of roots, roof, and refuge. Roots and refuge, I might have mixed them up. I know I have a bunch of stickers somewhere. But it's this framework that NBOP has developed through the issue work that we've been engaged in, Roof referring to the housing work, Roots referring to the rights of Mother Nature work, and Refuge in the immigrant defense work that the organization has taken up. And we want to, right now during the pandemic and hopefully ongoing, take an opportunity to feel more comfortable in articulating that publicly, right? And I think in order to get there, we have to have discussions amongst each other, but also tapping into the wisdom that exists within our networks. And with that said, I want to introduce our speaker, who is Davin Cardenas from Rise to the City. I'm trying to remember exactly what your title is, y perdón, but it gets me to my first question for Davin. Who are you and what do you do?
Nice to see you all, who I know most of you. Sarah, it's nice to meet you. And it looks like there's a Rachel online as well, and I don't think we've met, but I think I know everybody else, which is super awesome. And it's nice to be with you. And yeah, just thinking about the Roots Roof Refuge framing, I think it's like, in essence, it's about home. You know, it's like home is being like our the ecological body we live in, or the roof over our head, or what, you know, humans and non-humans, you know, strive for on this planet. So I think we're just thinking about the concept of home and what it means for us. So my title right now is National Field Organizer with Right to the City and the Homes for All campaign. And in the midst of this crisis, my focus is on mass outreach and engagement. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of renters who aren't able to pay rent, are considering going on rent strikes. And part of my job is to organize them. And if we do it correctly, if we do it well, the folks I'm organizing on a national level who happen to be from Santa Rosa or from Petaluma, hopefully they're going to be funneled into the local organizing of our members. NBOP is a member of this larger body. So that's the idea, that all national contacts are starting to get funneled to the regional and the local organizing. And before that, I was an organizer with NBOP for probably 7-8 years. Susan and I were the first staff on board way back in like 2010, 2011. And prior to that, Susan and I also were at the Grayton Bay Labor Center organizing jornaleros for 7-8 years as well. So that's a little bit of the background of my organizing.
Davin, can you also speak to a little bit of the history of how NBOP got into the housing work and your role in all of that?
Yeah, and I think it's just significant because NBOP was on the first wave of community organizations in the state and in the country that were pushing hard for rent control and just cause eviction. And now, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, they all turn to our solutions, right? What we've been saying about just cause for years, in the middle of a crisis, all the electeds are like, okay, we need a just cause moratorium, right? And not because it's like a leftist idea, but what we're talking about is common sense. You know, it's common sense organizing. And we need these policies when there's not a pandemic. We know that. But NBOP was pushing for rent control just cause when it wasn't cool to do it. And we were winning when it wasn't cool to win. And we turned it cool, right? That's what organizers do. We make something and we make it hyped, and we make it live, and we make it sexy, and then we make it palatable, and then we implement it, and then we win it, and then it benefits masses, right? But we were pushing for rent control in a moment where every liberal in Sonoma County told us not to, right? When we started organizing the tenants in a small complex, door knocking one night, we came across these tenants, and they said we have rats, we have mold, our babies have asthma from the mold. What do we do? And our job wasn't to say, well, go vote, go get them. We were like, let's organize. Those tenants went on a rent strike. They sued their slumlord. They ended up winning $2.7 million, 10 families, 10 Mexican families whose babies are going to go to college on a slumlord's dime because of our organizing, and led our rent control fight in 2015. That's how we got into the fight. But I also want to say that like the policies we see being passed in cities today and in cities in general and in our state, where we're moving towards just cause in the state, rent control in the state, it's only possible because we were taking the stand on a local level 5 years ago. And other cities were doing the same, but that was that first wave of like tenant organizing, or not the first wave, but the first, where rent control actually started winning. And I think it's important to point that out, because the victories we see now are possible because of the local organizing that was happening 5-6 years ago, right? So yeah, I think that's how we didn't strategically let's go into housing. We were literally pulled in by the masses. We were pulled in by folks who were getting hit by the hardest by the crisis, and it made sense for us. But it took a lot of courage of a lot of tenants to step up and step into that role, take on slumlords. It's almost counterintuitive to take on your landlord, but part of our job is to kind of stoke that fire and offer support. And so that's how MBOP got into the housing fight initially, and stayed in it.
Thank you for that background. The next question that I wanted to ask you, what are tools that you're seeing people, or that you're personally using to organize in this moment during the pandemic? I know that a lot of folks have been having this conversation. I'm sure that you've been having this conversation in your network and have been utilizing it. So I'm wondering if there's any local, regional, or statewide, maybe even national examples that you can share with us.
Yeah, I mean, the other quick little thing I want to say about the housing fight with MBOP2 is that it was because there was a sequence of tenants in different parts of the county starting to do actions on their landlords, and we were organizing them to do actions, and we were getting press every time. So there was a period of 6-7 months where every month the landlord or city council members were getting a black eye in the press from us, because tenants were organizing, doing public actions, they were getting press, and the narrative you could feel it shifting in the county, and that's why we were able to win some policies. So when I think about the tools that we're using or having to be implemented, I mean, some of it, and I know I talked to Beatrice a little bit about this too, but you could still hold, and I think it sounds like y'all have been doing it, but you could still hold accountability sessions, public meetings with public officials on Zoom, right? You could still use this. Who knows if the mayor is going to show up or not? But if he doesn't, there's going to be a little empty box on your screen that says mayor and has an empty chair or a rock or whatever it is on it. And if the press is on there, the absence of the target will be duly noted, right? So we can still use these online mechanisms. We're talking about doing that the Monday before May Day with Governor Newsom, with a bunch of other housing organizations in California. We don't know if he'll get on, and he might not, but there might be 1,000 renters that are online, and there might be 20 newspapers that are online, right? So still thinking about how to use the media strategically and the stories that we organize around. I think the other thing is also thinking of if tenants are considering going on rent strike, or if you're hearing stories that they can't pay, and these stories that we hear constantly around hardships, I think we have to ask the tenants, are they willing to politicize the story and make it public? So that, again, it's some of the narrative work being done within media, we have to use the press to our benefit to actually lift up the stories, because it shapes what's possible politically. And then tied to that idea of using the press and the stories is what's our usage of culture in the public realm, in the public domain? How are we using art and culture to actually shift ideas, right? It's open field right now for the battle of ideas, and we have to engage in it and impress ourselves into that the battlefield of ideas. And you know, like Fabiana Rodriguez says, she always says like culture moves faster than politics, and culture precedes politics. It's like you can't have policy changes unless you've shifted how people think about an idea or think about a policy. And so what cultural interventions are we making right now? Some of those are going to be online to some extent, and some of those might have to be physical. Like, are you able to shut traffic? Are you able to do banner drops? Are you able to, you know, have honking actions where people just honk at the mayor for like 10 minutes or whatever? You know, I don't know. But we have to get creative with how we're thinking and how the press picks it up, how the general populace sees us, right? Because, because we're still trying to win hearts and minds in the campaign work we're doing. You know, if some of you have seen, like online, we've been doing a 10-day music festival where we have like brilliant musicians and poets every evening at 6 p.m. They're doing concerts, and it's a cancel rent festival. So it's like the message and the branding around cancel rent is getting picked up by my favorite artists in the whole world. And you know, we're using social media to push it. And then, you know, all of a sudden we see there was like the council members from 10 cities across the country on April 1st. They held their press conference saying, we're calling on the governors to cancel rents. We're calling on legislators. So it's like the more we move the message, hopefully it starts going up the chain. I heard Ilhan Omar is going to introduce a bill into the next stimulus package calling to cancel rents also, right? So it's like the more we use culture on a grassroots level, it starts getting picked up and the message starts getting amplified more and more. So you know, that's part of why we're trying to use the usage of culture, of popular messaging, and these tools that we have in front of us. I was just on a call with another national organization. We're trying to build national relationships with people who do it, and they were just naming that like this is all experimentation. And it felt good to hear someone else say it, because I feel that every morning. I'm like, what the hell are we doing? And then it's like, and so for them to name, like, we're experimenting. This guy was like, anybody who tells you they know exactly what we're supposed to be doing right now is full of shit. You know, it's like, this is like a moment where we're like, oh, okay, let's figure this out as we go. But it's not that we necessarily know exactly what we're doing. These are new tools in our arsenal, in our toolbox. And so, we're figuring out how to use them most effectively. So yeah, the long-winded way. I don't know if I got exactly to answering the question.
No, yeah, that was rich. There's a lot there to digest and to think about. You know, one of the things that I was hoping to draw out, if you have it, Davin, is a story of how you know, either your organization, Rights to the City, or a story of another organization you've heard has responded to the need for a rent strike. You know, we've been having discussions internally, and I know folks, you know, in NBOP, we recognize that, you know, a rent strike is a tactic and it's not necessarily a campaign. But can you speak to how an organization can support a rent strike if we hear it bubbling up organically?
Yeah, and I think just making the distinction between a rent strike and which is like the physical withholding of your rent, like you have rent and you can pay it, and folks who simply don't have rent, you know, and trying to politicize that moment in their lives where they're like, this crisis has me penniless, I can't pay rent, what do I do? Just you know, and it's a slight distinction, and it doesn't, you know, I think it should be made, but it's not necessary all the time, because folks are like, I can't pay rent, I'm going on rent strike, which is all good. Like, we have to support that energy coming from tenants, from renters. And just because we might have different language around it, it doesn't matter. Like, the fact that people want to politicize the moment that they're living is actually what's super important. I think another consideration though is that, like, a strike or not being able to pay your rent doesn't become an individual act of like an allied person who can pay their rent, who in their home is like, well, I'm not going to pay the rent. One, it's very risky. And secondly, it should be thought of as an organizing campaign, right? So if you're living in a complex, it's actually imperative that you're trying to build with your neighbors in this moment towards the tactic of a strike, right? So it's not just you in apartment 1 and there's 30 other apartments that aren't doing it because there's not much to be gained. Like it might be a righteous act, but righteous acts aren't creating policy, right? So it's like, can you organize your building? And if you're organizing your building, can you organize with others in the city who are doing the same thing? Like I think the LA Tenants Union is starting to move some of these ideas down in LA. And then also, like, again, can you politicize it? Get narrative work tied to it. Are you willing to tell your story to the media? Because the more stories we have, it pushes more pressure. But the strikes should be part of demands, right? And right now, the main demand that I'm hearing is like that the governor cancel rents, cancel mortgages. It seems like we might have a stronger just cause policy in place since yesterday. But there's still this need, like it's going to be really messed up for renters 3 months from now to go to being indebted and then evicted 3 months down the line because they haven't worked in 2-3 months. So I think the call should be unified, and I think it's an important time to make it. But part of what we've been saying is that we want to support renters with legal support. We want to support renters in knowing the risks they're taking if they are going physically on strike, or if they simply can't pay the rent, like what legal responsibilities and what precautions to take. And then the secondly is like, what does May 1st look like, right? What's the political and cultural intervention on May Day? Like this is International Workers' Day, and this is like in the middle of one of the craziest global pandemic crises in our lifetime, easily landing on May Day, landing on the moment that renters can't pay rent, landing on the moment that workers can't work, right? So what kind of interventions culturally are we making in the places, in the cities we live? What kind of noise are we making? What kind of art are we creating? And those for us right now are like brainstorms. They're considerations. Like, but May Day is very strategic, just because it's our day. This is the day of the workers, right? Internationally, and it's landing right in front of us in this moment where workers are like, we know them to be everything. We say it every day, but it's more than ever now. It's like this idea of like essential workers, like they've been essential the whole time, right? But right now is a moment where, yeah, we just have to think specifically. I think May Day is an important moment for us. I don't think it's the only moment, but I think it should be a consideration for us. And then recognizing that June might be another one, right? And the other just quick thing I want to say is that, like, when we think about organizing right now and trying to build a bigger base, because that's what we should be considering. How do we build more renters into our movement? It's also because, like, when in August, when they try to start lifting these moratoriums and we go back to normal, like, we have to shut shit down. Like, we can't let things go back to normal. Like, so we have to position ourselves now so that when we're able to congregate again as humans, we have mass numbers who are not going to go back to what it was, and really force the city to maintain the temporary moratoriums and expand them. And if they don't, then as we get closer to November, we get those people out, right? So we're thinking a little bit longer term than just May, June. We're thinking how these have political reverberations as we go towards November, and how we're positioning ourselves to actually have more power and use our bodies more when we're able to.
Thank you, Devin, for that. You know, one of the things that comes to mind for me is in order to get to a place where we have those numbers that you're speaking about, or to have the capacity to keep that momentum and to continue to shut things down and not allow it to go back to normalcy, because we know what was normal wasn't working for us, right? Is getting to like the most fundamental thing in community organizing, as far as I understand it, is relationships, right? And relationship building. And as leaders and organizers in the housing struggle or the tenant struggle, how could we be using this moment to reinforce relationships that we have, create new relationships, inspire others to also figure out how to use these tools like Zoom, like making phone calls, to, I keep thinking of the metaphor of and maybe I need to look into it a little bit more of like metamorphosis, the butterfly, how, you go into a cocoon and come out even more beautiful and stronger. And I'm just thinking, in this time that we're, of social distancing, how do we come out of it with that vision in mind? And what is the process that needs to be happening while we're here to fortify those relationships? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I think it's probably on all our minds. I'm definitely not the only one who could speak to it. But one of the things that did come to mind is like just phone calls to members, right? And that's not just organizers doing that, but that's actually a task that like key leaders, if they take 3 people a day just to do in the little script, like, hey, I'm calling from the tenants union just to check in, how you're doing, just like strengthening the base. And that's something like just a little phone tree actually can go a long way. Just checking in on people who are feeling like this crazy sense of isolation right now, I think goes a long way in terms of like fortifying the base and letting folks know that the union and MBOP is like, it's a body. We have to demonstrate love in different ways right now. And so I think just those, like, it might be organizers doing it, but it might be a set of core leaders that's their duty is to do 3 phone calls a day. Here's a list. And the same, maybe even calling on council members on two council members a day. Everybody's going to do it. You get done. You ask your neighbor to do it, but just offering people simple tasks, or not even simple tasks, but like things that they can do. Because like, I know for me, I want to feel a sense of agency, and not being able to act on my values is very disempowering. So when I feel like I'm like, oh, well, the world's fucked, I can't do anything about it. It's a very depressing state of mind when you don't have the ability to act, right? So I think just offering folks like simple things they can be doing on a daily that is political, that is in the world, and that's checking in on people. That's maybe calling a council member, but beginning to develop out those tasks that might, they're not mundane, right? It's like they're political in nature, but it's just things that people are doing so that we come out stronger. And maybe it's not just current members, it's people you've been thinking about working with. Maybe it's political relationships you want to develop out over the long term, organizations. I remember like when Trump got elected, like I had to make a lot of phone calls that were like I'm sorry. I made a lot of I'm sorry phone calls where like I had political divisions with people and with organizations, and I had to be like, this is a different moment we're living. And I just want to like bury the beef and say we don't have time or space for that. Like, and I want to build with you, And I think like we're living in a really interesting political moment too, where we should think about like what are the relationships we want to come out of this with, because we're going to need each other. So I think just for us thinking politically, the relationships you want to build, and then just for the members and for organizers to just be just showing care physically. And sometimes it's not Zoom, like people are also zoomed out. So I think using just the old school phone, right? Just get back to the phone and those just regularizing the check-ins for the people around us.
Thank you. Thank you, Davin. So at this point, we do want to open it up for discussion. I just want to acknowledge the comments in the chat that Sara and Gabriela about the car parade. As a Chicano, we call that cruising. But I like the idea. So I'm wondering if there's anybody who'd like to share a comment or ask a question to Davin while we have him on the call, or share a reflection on anything that we touched on during the discussion. If you do, please raise your hand or say that you want to speak in the chat, and we'll unmute you.
Or since we have such a small group, go ahead and unmute yourself too, I guess. If
Okay,
you
cool.
want to just jump in, either will work, but
All right,
that way
I
I don't
wasn't
have
sure.
to manage it.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we had that restriction on.
No, it's totally unrestricted
Okay,
today.
thank you.
I'm thinking about, Davin, you mentioned folks in LA, like the LA Tenants Union, and some of the actions that they are doing right now, where they actually are, and you didn't go into detail or really mention it, but I've been following, and there's folks that are in the street, they're doing their 6 feet distance, and they have their masks and they have their signs. And I know that that's something that tenants are wondering about, and tenant leaders are wondering about, like what is the risk at doing that? Like, have people, it says my voice is really low. Are you hearing anything from folks in LA? Like, what's happening with folks in LA when they are actually going in the street? Like, are police showing up and telling and enforcing shelter in place?
I don't know. I mean, there's anecdotal stories of people, I think the police beginning to ramp up citations for folks. I haven't heard that in the tenants' rights movement or actions. And then, the other thing that comes to mind too, along those lines, and I think should be a strategic consideration for all of us come June, July, is like what the tenants in El Sereno are doing with like taking over vacant properties that are sitting there, and just like really, I think there's a lot of potency there. And I know some of the El Sereno homes that were taken back for the people, I think some of them we might have lost a couple, but I know the majority are still being held down in El Sereno in LA. And these were like Caltrans owned homes that were sitting vacant for years, and now they're being occupied by the people. And I think that's a very potent strategy, because it just forces the contradiction on the state, it forces the contradiction into the public realm, and it just points out the silliness of our economic system that allows people to be unhoused and housing to be unpeopled, So yeah, yeah, but I don't, beyond like the public demonstrations that people are starting to do, I haven't heard too much on like police pushback on those so far.
Yeah, Susan?
There's been a couple of demonstrations. I noticed Sarah and Gabby's comments. There's been an effective one in Oakland and another one in San Francisco that were car demonstrations, where people put signs on their cars and they had megaphones yelling out their car windows, and they were honking, and they were pretty effective in communicating what people wanted, with the cars driving in front of the city hall, and really demonstrating that even though we're cooped up and we can't be with each other, we're serious about what we want.
Yeah, I saw those too. That's awesome.
Yeah, they were fabulous, both of them. The pictures were amazing.
Now, there were some in Philadelphia as well, but I also know that people were cited, like they got like parking tickets or something like that. It was kind of a funny thing. There's like an article where the police like claim that they didn't like ticket anybody, but there's literally a picture. It's like the front, like the top picture of somebody getting cited.
Yeah, and maybe even citations can be used strategically, because it looks terrible.
Yeah.
Like somebody's like fighting for nurses, and the police is like so maybe it's like it's trying to use those moments actually strategically to see how backwards the system is.
Totally.
One of the things that I'm trying to understand or wrap my head around more, and is the connection to land use strategies and and I'm wondering if there's anybody that could speak more to that, as like when we're thinking about the end goal or what the campaign is. You know, I know that I've been doing some reading around that, but I wish I had more expertise than I do.
We are working on that in MBOP. I mean, a big part of what we're working on in order to build a housing trust for undocumented folks, so that'll be the first ever. And we're in partnership with Common Space. So it's definitely part of the housing work.
Can you say more about that, Susan? Like what it is, or like for anybody who may not even know what a land trust is?
Well, you know, 65% of the Housing Task Force talked about this last week. 65% of the world's wealth is in housing and land. And the only way that we can take, well, not the only way, but we need to take back that wealth. It cannot be sequestered like that by such a small number of people who are controlling so much of the world's wealth. And that is what's contributing in large part to not having enough houses for people, because they're sequestered almost like they're in a safe deposit box somewhere, and they're not being lived in, and we need them for people to live in.
Yeah.
And by decommodifying or taking the housing off the market, we can start to own that and control that. And it doesn't have to be a method for generating wealth for people, but it can be a method of protecting what's earned through their labor, so that that doesn't go into someone else's hands like a landlord. It stays in their own hands. So people can give their energy and their labor and their time and their money to something that's a collective process, and takes the commodification of, it's another step in owning their own labor and taking the commodification away from the wealthy in this country, who continue to build wealth by taking our land and our housing. I mean, Mnuchin, who's its treasurer, he made $1.2 billion in 2008 foreclosing on people. His wealth came from taking people's homes away from them. And we cannot let that happen. We're not going to let that happen. That's why we're doing the work we're doing. It won't happen again. If people have been able to stay in their houses and not been shamed about having those bad mortgages, we'd have a totally different picture in this country right now.
Davin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I know cities are also looking at like TOPA policies, like the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act policies, that allows, like, if you do a housing takeover, there's like actually that tenants who are going to be evicted, or when you do take over housing, the tenants have the first opportunity to actually purchase it into a land trust. So, you know, that takes a lot of fundraising and a lot of like grassroots work to actually pull off, but at least the opportunity is there, instead of these landlords kind of just flipping homes all over the place. It does give the ability for tenants, either collectively or as individuals, to purchase the first opportunity to purchase back the homes they're being evicted from. So I know that policy talk has been brewing at the statewide level too. I see that Samir's on. Samir, my coworker.
Hey, what's up, Samir?
There's a ton of examples all over the world and in this country where people have, by their own labor, bought land and housing collectively and figured out how they wanted to use that wealth for themselves. It's amazing to read about them and study up on them. And when we had during the tenants union assembly, they held a community housing trust workshop, and there's 20 people there. And there was the Anglos and Spanish speakers. And when we were talking about that, one of the sort of Anglos said, well, how do you fund this? And a couple of the Mexican immigrant leaders said, we can fund this ourselves. We know how to save money. We can do this ourselves. We don't need some grant coming to us that is then going to tell us what to do, which was really powerful statement on their part.
Yeah. To get back to the that framework of the roof, roots, and refuge, you know, what helps me always get to a place where I feel comfortable articulating these concepts is internalizing and reflecting, like, what does that mean for me, right? When I was living in Santa Rosa and the rents were increasing, you know, I was living in Burbank housing, and if I made any more money, I was gonna get pushed out of that Burbank housing. And then I saw what the market was outside of that Burbank housing, and realized, oh, in Modesto, I can rent a 4-bedroom house for that amount of money, you know, or actually for a lot less. And it played a big role in my decision to move out here, right? So I think it's those kinds of things that like I was impacted by housing in that way, that it pushed me out. And now that I have this opportunity to come back, I can't afford to come back to Santa Rosa. I have to go to Fairfield, and I have the privilege of having an opportunity that you know, as a recently 30-year-old man with a family, is going to move in with my mom, you know, and to save some money. And it's the only real way that I can see that I could even have some footing in that housing, in like the housing crisis. Like how could I take my family and house them if I didn't have that privilege? So when I think about, like, what is this framework of roots, of roots and refuge mean for me, it begins with that story for me. So I want to invite folks to internalize that framework and think about what are the stories, or what stories in your life are connected to that, you know. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, or reflections?
There's a question
Amber?
proposed in the chat.
Oh.
I put my question in the chat because I'm multitasking over here. So I was worried I might be in the middle of getting something else ready for us. But I've just been sort of observing what it looks like to do this organizing right now with our city. And it seems like there's a lot of variation from city to city and what they're doing. But because we have a pretty progressive city manager, we're like kind of on the cutting edge of it. So we actually had a virtual city council meeting last night with public comment. We even like saluted the flag. It was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, like having this virtual like pledge of the allegiance to a digitized flag. But what, you know, one of the things that came up was that this is why I put my question in the comments, because I have company distracting me. One of the things that came up was that, you know, the mayors are meeting weekly with the other mayors in Sonoma County as we were discussing this eviction ordinance. It was very clear that they were all trying to get on the same page about what the story was going to be around eviction. You know, they were acknowledging the influence of MBOP's work on the choices that they were making. And so because we're slightly cutting edge here, like what opportunity do we have in Petaluma to sort of push it? And like, if we think about the regional thing that's going on with other cities being even further ahead of it, like Oakland, or I just thought maybe Davin, you could speak to this a little in terms of regional organizing, how we can work in this moment to push our agenda.
Yeah, I don't fully know. I don't know. I think it might be within the context of like, it might be supervisors' policies. I think if you can also get more progressive electeds actually speaking on your issues and speaking on your framing, it's very helpful. But grassroots organizations also have to be in a position to do that, like to offer the space by which they can come in and speak the same thing we're speaking. And sometimes that's them, just forcing a contradiction with their peers. So yeah, that's policy-wise. I think we should be talking, we were preparing for a June 6th Bay Area renter assembly, and that's been postponed, but we do have the infrastructure for renters to unite across the Bay. And maybe we'll have to digitize that. I think it's on hold right now, but it'd probably make a lot of sense to try to digitize that, or get us meeting virtually. And then also, like, to the extent that you all want to be plugged into statewide conversations too, just because there's such a push right now on the governor around canceling the rents. I know we're going to have a call this Thursday evening with the other individuals and organizations from across the state at 5:30 on Thursday. And yeah, so I don't mean to make more meetings for people, but there are, we do have the infrastructure around like organizing regionally with other renters in the Bay Area and other organizations doing exactly what MBOP does in Daly City and in Vallejo and in, Richmond. And so it's there. We just have to kind of enact it, and make it strategic and effective. So it's not just another meeting.
Sure. Thank you. So we're getting close to the end, and I'm wondering if there are any other comments. Susan, did you have a comment? Or
Sarah put a question in there.
Okay. I just wanted to shout out the Sonoma County Tenants Union for their letter and poster today. It's totally generating a response. So I just wanted to say that was like really great work. The poster's great. The letter's awesome. Good work, you guys. It's really.
It was a letter to the editor, or what was it?
Why doesn't that explain?
Oh, are you talking about the letter about the Santa Rosa City Council, or is that?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael was working on that, putting out a letter, just kind of demanding accountability from Santa Rosa City Council since they haven't met in 3 weeks.
Nice.
And if folks haven't seen it, the poster is like they're a missing poster, and it's looking for leads, like where they at, where y'all at. Yeah, I thought it was really good. That was awesome. Any other questions? Oh yeah. So there was a question in the chat, Sarah or Sarah. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm sorry. Also wondering about communication tools and strategies, how to get the conversations going between diverse groups, etc. I feel like there's a danger of people getting stuck in bubbles with the ways we organize, but there's also probably new opportunities as well. Anybody want to respond to that?
I think it's a great thing to point out that there's a huge risk of us getting bubbleized right now. I mean, we know like the algorithms or whatever on Facebook and social media do that, and like it's just heightened right now. So it's really important to even consider that it might get more heightened now that we're spending so much more time online. And
I'd like to lift something up. No sé cómo funciona esto porque estoy en el canal de español. ¿Me escuchan todos?
Sí, te escuchamos.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Well, I was pretending to only speak Spanish, but I'll just do it in English. Oh yeah, so last week though, talking about the new opportunities or ways to not be stuck in bubbles, the opportunity with our partners in Napa who are looking and seeking assistance in ways that their communities can also address landlords that are, particular landlords that are threatening. It sounds like they've been threatening in other instances the same tenants, and other partners not knowing how to go about this, and the way in which the reach of MBOP's learnings could also leverage this opportunity to collaborate. So I just wanted to put that out there because there's folks that, yeah, do look at the work of MBOP, and especially the Sonoma County Tenants Union and what you all just mentioned with the poster that you put out. People wanting to take that lead, or follow that lead, and the opportunity that there is now. I just want to throw that out there. It's not really a solution, but just throwing it out there.
Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you. Thank you. So we also wanted folks to leave this space with some type of material, and whether it's a reading, like an article or something like that. And today what we have for everybody is a document, an article that comes from Right to the City. It's the critical role of renters in growing and leading a working class struggle. It's in the chat now. There's a link to it. It's an awesome 2-pager that if you might have seen already, but if not, it's some good language or good way to look at this conversation as well about the renters movement. Very quickly before we go, I wanted to also plug next week's, or not next week's, I'm sorry, Thursdays. The days feel like weeks. Thursday's School of Change. We're going to be having Omar Gallardo. He's the maestro of Aztec Danza group in Santa Rosa called Chantol, and he's going to be on speaking about Aztec Danza. If you've seen the Aztec dancers in their regalia in doing ceremony at marches or in other events, and had wondering what is going on with all that drumming and fancy footwork. He's going to be sharing some of that knowledge with us and speaking to the outlook that Aztec dancing gives in viewing rights of Mother Earth. So to continue that getting comfortable in articulating the roof, roots, and refuge. So we hope that folks log on to that call as well. Thursday, 3 to 4.